Hello guys, welcome back to Basketball Fan. Today we are diving into a really fascinating basketball conversation that has been building for quite some time among fans, analysts, and people who closely follow the women's game. The topic is the potential pairing of Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers on the same team. It is one of those ideas that immediately sparks excitement because both players are incredibly talented, highly intelligent on the court, and capable of changing a game in completely different ways. For years, fans have imagined what it would look like if these two stars shared the floor. At the same time, there has always been this strange tendency within sports conversations to frame everything as a rivalry. People often try to push a narrative that one player has to be better than the other, or that the two are somehow competing for the same spotlight. But when you truly watch their games and understand how they play basketball, it becomes very clear that the comparison between them is often misguided. They are not identical players. They do not naturally occupy the exact same role. In fact, their differences are precisely what make the idea of them playing together so intriguing. When you analyze Caitlin Clark's game, the first thing that stands out is her role as a floor general. Yes, the numbers she put up during her college career are absolutely historic. Becoming the all-time leading scorer in NCAA Division I women's basketball history is a remarkable achievement that immediately places her among the most legendary players the college game has ever seen. However, what makes that accomplishment even more fascinating is that scoring is not necessarily the foundation of her basketball instincts. Clark is someone who naturally thinks about the game as a creator first. Her mind is constantly working to manipulate defenses, open up space, and generate opportunities for the players around her. She reads defensive rotations with an almost instinctive awareness and often sees passing angles that most players would never even attempt. Her ability to control the pace of a game is what separates her from many other guards. She can slow things down when needed, speed up the tempo in transition, and orchestrate an offense that keeps defenders constantly guessing. Clark thrives when she is the central decision-maker within an offensive system. When the ball is in her hands, she becomes the engine that powers everything else. Her passing vision is elite, and it allows teammates to get open looks that might not exist without her presence. She is comfortable taking risks, making bold cross-court passes, threading the ball through tight defensive gaps, and launching quick outlet passes that immediately turn defense into offense. That willingness to take chances is part of what makes her so exciting to watch. It is also part of what allows her teams to generate explosive scoring runs. In many ways, Clark represents the classic idea of a point guard who elevates everyone around her. Her scoring ability is extraordinary, but it is often the byproduct of her playmaking rather than the sole focus of her approach. On the other side of the conversation is Paige Bueckers, whose style of play operates from a slightly different foundation. Paige is commonly described as a combo guard, and that label fits her extremely well because she has the flexibility to operate in multiple roles. At her core, though, Paige is a scorer. She is one of the most efficient offensive players in the game, and her ability to create shots for herself is something that stands out immediately when you watch her play. She is incredibly composed with the ball, rarely forcing situations unnecessarily, and she has a natural sense of timing when attacking defenses. Whether she is pulling up for a mid-range jumper, driving to the rim, or knocking down a perimeter shot, Paige plays with a calm confidence that makes her extremely dangerous. Her skill in the pick and roll is one of the strongest elements of her offensive arsenal. When Paige runs a pick and roll, her first instinct is often to evaluate how she can score. That does not mean she ignores passing opportunities. She is more than capable of finding open teammates and making smart decisions with the basketball. But the difference lies in the mentality. Paige's natural instinct is to look for the shot that she can create. She thrives when she is attacking defenders, using footwork and body control to generate high-quality scoring opportunities. That aggressive scoring mindset is what makes her such a reliable offensive weapon. Because of these contrasting styles, the idea of Clark and Bueckers sharing a backcourt becomes extremely interesting from a strategic standpoint. Rather than overlapping in a way that creates redundancy, their strengths actually complement each other. Clark is at her best when she is orchestrating the offense, reading the defense, and creating opportunities. Paige is at her best when she is attacking those opportunities and turning them into points. If Clark is controlling the flow of the game and drawing defensive attention, it opens the door for Paige to operate more freely as a scorer. She can work off the ball, attack closeouts, run pick-and-roll situations, and exploit mismatches created by the defense focusing too heavily on Clark. This dynamic is something that many successful basketball teams have relied on. Often the most effective backcourts feature one player who naturally facilitates and another who naturally scores. The facilitator manipulates the defense, while the scorer punishes the defensive adjustments that follow. When those roles are balanced properly, the offense becomes extremely difficult to stop because defenders cannot focus on just one threat. That is exactly what makes the idea of Clark and Bueckers so exciting. Each player would be able to lean into what they already do best without needing to completely change their identity. There is also an interesting conversation about how Clark might adapt when playing on a roster filled with elite talent, particularly in an environment like the United States women's national basketball team. During her college career, the entire offensive system often revolved around her. The team was designed to maximize her playmaking abilities, and she had the freedom to experiment, take risks, and play through mistakes. That type of freedom is common when a generational player becomes the centerpiece of a program. However, the international stage can sometimes require a slightly different mindset. Team USA rosters are stacked with elite players at every position. Instead of one player being responsible for creating everything, the system typically distributes responsibilities across multiple stars. In that type of environment, Clark might have to make subtle adjustments. She would still be a playmaker and a floor general, but she might not need to force the same level of risk-taking that she sometimes embraced in college. On a team filled with talented scorers and playmakers, the smartest approach might involve simplifying certain decisions, trusting teammates more quickly, and allowing the collective talent of the roster to carry the offensive load. Meanwhile, Paige Bueckers might slide into that environment very naturally. One of the defining characteristics of her game is versatility. She can adapt to different roles depending on what the team needs at any given moment. That adaptability is why some analysts describe her as a Swiss Army knife type of player. She can play as a shooting guard, operate as a secondary ball handler, and even take on point guard responsibilities when the lineup requires it. In certain small ball situations, she has even demonstrated the ability to function in a forward-type role, something she showed at UConn Huskies women's basketball during different lineup combinations. Because of that flexibility, Paige can easily fit into lineups that include multiple ball handlers or multiple scorers. She does not need to dominate the ball in order to be effective. Instead, she can move within the flow of the offense, choosing the right moments to attack while still maintaining efficiency. That quality becomes especially valuable when playing alongside a player like Clark, who naturally commands defensive attention. When discussions about this potential backcourt pairing arise, one of the most common concerns people mention is defense. Some fans worry that having Clark and Bueckers together might create vulnerabilities on the defensive end. However, when you examine the broader roster context, that concern might be somewhat exaggerated. Teams like Team USA typically have strong defensive specialists on the perimeter who can take on the toughest matchups. Players such as Jackie Young and Kalia Copper have built reputations as aggressive, athletic defenders capable of guarding high-level scorers. With players like that on the floor, Clark and Bueckers would not necessarily have to shoulder the most demanding defensive assignments. Instead, they could focus more energy on driving the offense while still contributing within a team defensive system. Modern basketball often relies on collective defensive strategies rather than individual isolation defense, and having multiple athletes capable of rotating and covering ground can minimize potential weaknesses. Offensively, though, the potential of this duo is what truly captures people's imagination. Picture a lineup where Clark is pushing the tempo, advancing the ball quickly in transition, and scanning the court for passing opportunities. Defenders are forced to react to her deep shooting range and her ability to launch accurate passes across the court. As that defensive attention shifts toward Clark, it creates space elsewhere on the floor. That is where Paige becomes incredibly dangerous. She can cut into open lanes, receive quick passes for catch-and-shoot opportunities, or attack defenders who are scrambling to recover. The constant decision-making pressure placed on opposing defenses could become overwhelming. If defenders collapse on Clark, Paige finds open scoring opportunities. If they focus too heavily on Paige, Clark has the freedom to dictate the offense and create shots for everyone else. That kind of dual-threat backcourt forces defenses into a lose-lose scenario where every adjustment opens another weakness. For years, fans have imagined what it would look like if these two stars shared a long-term partnership at the professional level. There were even moments when people jokingly suggested that certain teams should intentionally struggle just to secure the opportunity to draft Paige Bueckers and pair her with Clark. While that idea was mostly said in jest, it reflects how strongly fans believe in the potential chemistry between these two players. The reality is that great basketball partnerships are rarely built on identical skill sets. Instead, the most memorable duos often succeed because their abilities enhance each other. One player creates opportunities while the other finishes them. One controls the tempo while the other delivers the scoring punch. In the case of Clark and Bueckers, those complementary traits appear very naturally within their games. Another interesting aspect of their potential partnership lies in how their personalities on the court interact. Clark plays with a fiery, competitive energy. She is constantly communicating, directing teammates, and pushing the pace of the game. Bueckers, on the other hand, often displays a calm and composed demeanor. She seems comfortable letting the game come to her before striking at the perfect moment. Those contrasting energies can actually balance a team's rhythm. One player provides urgency and momentum, while the other provides control and precision. As the conversation continues here on Basketball Fan, one thing becomes increasingly clear. If Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers ever share the floor regularly, the dynamic between them could redefine how people view elite backcourts in women's basketball. Instead of framing them as rivals competing for the same spotlight, it may become more accurate to see them as partners whose talents amplify each other. Clark will always be the type of player who looks to create opportunities. If Paige is open, Clark will find her. If Paige is cutting toward the basket, Clark's vision will likely pick it up instantly. That is simply how Clark processes the game. She sees movement and immediately thinks about how to deliver the ball at exactly the right moment. Paige, meanwhile, will continue to operate as a scorer who thrives on those opportunities. Her instinct will be to attack, rise up for a shot, or pressure the defense in ways that force mistakes. When those instincts come together in the same backcourt, the result could be something special. It becomes a balanced offensive structure where one player orchestrates and the other executes. Clark runs the offense, guiding the rhythm and direction of each possession, while Paige capitalizes on the openings that appear within that structure and turns smart passes into efficient scoring chances. That is why so many basketball fans are fascinated by the idea of seeing them play together. It is not simply about combining two talented players. It is about blending two different basketball philosophies into a single system that maximizes both. And here on Basketball Fan, that is exactly the type of basketball story we love to break down. In the end, the excitement surrounding Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers is not really about rivalry at all. It is about the possibility that when two great players finally share the floor, their differences might transform them into one of the most dangerous backcourts the game has ever seen. And when defenses collapse on the playmaking of Caitlin Clark, the impact of the backcourt partnership becomes even more dangerous because that defensive attention naturally creates opportunities for Paige Bueckers to thrive. This is one of the most important dynamics when discussing how these two players could function together at the highest level of basketball. Clark has always been the type of player who forces defenses to react. Her ability to control the tempo, extend the floor with deep shooting range, and deliver precise passes across the court means opposing defenses cannot simply guard her in a traditional way. They have to constantly adjust, collapse into help coverage, and rotate defenders to cut off passing lanes. But the moment defenses commit too much attention toward Clark's playmaking, that is exactly when Paige becomes an even more dangerous offensive weapon. This is where the potential lineup combinations start to make even more sense. When you place strong two-way players around Clark and Bueckers, the overall structure of the lineup becomes much more balanced. For example, players such as Jackie Young or Kalia Copper bring elite athleticism, defensive toughness, and scoring versatility. Having those types of players on the floor alongside Clark and Bueckers creates a lineup that covers nearly every possible need. The two-way wings can handle the toughest defensive assignments on the perimeter, while also contributing offensively through cuts, transition scoring, and physical drives to the basket. When that type of balance exists, it allows Clark and Bueckers to focus more heavily on what they do best defensively without the entire defensive burden resting on their shoulders. One of the most common questions that always comes up whenever people talk about a Clark and Bueckers backcourt is defense. Fans naturally wonder if opposing guards will try to target them. It is a fair question because whenever two offensive-minded guards share the floor, critics tend to assume that defense will automatically become a weakness. However, when you really examine the context of international basketball and the types of opponents the United States women's national basketball team typically faces, the concern might actually be a bit exaggerated. If you start looking at the guards on some of the other national teams that regularly compete in international tournaments, there are certainly talented players. Italy, for example, has perimeter players who can score and create offense. Spain often develops technically skilled guards with strong fundamentals and basketball IQ. Some of those teams feature emerging young players who are capable of making plays and putting pressure on opposing defenses. Players like Cecilia Zandalicini from Italy or promising young Spanish guards bring skill and experience to the international stage. Spain also has versatile players such as Maria Conde who understand how to move the ball and create scoring opportunities within their offensive systems. Those are all quality players, and no one should underestimate their ability to compete at the international level. But realistically speaking, most of them are not the type of high-volume isolation scorers who consistently dominate games against elite defensive teams. They are skilled, disciplined, and capable of making plays within a system, but they are rarely the kind of unstoppable offensive forces that completely overwhelm opponents on their own. Because of that, the idea that a Clark-Bueckers defensive pairing would constantly be exposed might not fully reflect the reality of international competition. Neither Clark nor Bueckers is a bad defender. They might not be considered elite lockdown defenders in the same category as some of the best defensive specialists in the world, but they are certainly capable of holding their own. Both players understand defensive positioning, team rotations, and how to read offensive actions. Paige in particular has shown strong on-ball defensive instincts at times, using her strength and balance to stay in front of opposing guards. Clark, meanwhile, has demonstrated an ability to read passing lanes and anticipate plays, which allows her to contribute through steals and defensive rotations. When you combine those defensive abilities with the overwhelming talent advantage that Team USA usually possesses, the overall defensive concern becomes much less significant. Historically, the United States has dominated international women's basketball because of the sheer depth of athleticism, skill, and experience available in its player pool. Even when there are small defensive weaknesses within a lineup, the overall team talent usually compensates for them. In fact, some international matchups can become extremely one-sided once Team USA finds its offensive rhythm. There are many games in international tournaments where the United States pushes the pace, creates transition opportunities, and quickly builds large scoring margins. Once a powerhouse roster begins clicking offensively, the pace of the game can become overwhelming for opposing teams. The score can escalate rapidly because the combination of speed, athleticism, and shooting depth creates constant pressure. That is why the idea of pairing Clark and Bueckers together becomes so intriguing from an offensive perspective. When you imagine the two sharing the floor, the offensive possibilities start to multiply. Clark's ability to manipulate defenses with her passing and long-range shooting naturally creates space across the court. Paige's ability to attack those openings with efficient scoring turns those opportunities into immediate points. Looking ahead to the future of international basketball, especially when thinking about major tournaments such as the FIBA Women's Basketball World Cup or the Summer Olympics, the guard rotation for Team USA may gradually evolve toward a more offense-driven style. Modern basketball continues to move toward spacing, shot creation, and offensive creativity. Players who can generate scoring opportunities and stretch defenses are becoming increasingly valuable. This is where the next generation of American guards becomes incredibly exciting. Players like Sabrina Ionescu, Caitlin Clark, and Paige Bueckers all bring unique offensive abilities that can transform the way a team attacks opposing defenses. None of them are known primarily as defensive specialists, but what they bring offensively forces defenses into uncomfortable situations. Their shooting range, playmaking ability, and scoring versatility create constant pressure that changes how defenses are forced to operate. Over the long term, it is entirely possible that Bueckers develops into the slightly stronger on-ball defender between the two. Paige has a solid frame for a guard, and she often uses her body positioning effectively to stay balanced when defending drives. Clark, meanwhile, could continue to evolve as more of a help-side defender. Her basketball instincts allow her to read developing plays, rotate into passing lanes, and provide secondary defensive support when teammates need help. As their careers progress, both players will likely continue improving on the defensive side of the floor. Defensive development is something that often evolves over time as players gain experience, study opposing tendencies, and learn the subtle details of positioning and anticipation. Because of their basketball IQ and competitive mindset, it would not be surprising if both Clark and Bueckers gradually become more complete defenders as their careers mature. Still, the true excitement surrounding this potential backcourt combination lies on the offensive end of the floor. Even if neither player begins their international career as a permanent starter in the biggest tournaments, it would not be surprising to see lineups where Clark and Bueckers share the floor together for significant stretches of time. Coaches often experiment with different combinations during international competition, especially when they want to unlock certain offensive advantages. Whenever those two players are on the court at the same time, the offensive pressure they create could become extremely difficult for opposing teams to manage. Clark's playmaking ability constantly forces defenders to rotate and adjust. Paige's scoring instinct punishes those adjustments with quick, efficient offense. The combination of those two skill sets creates a backcourt that can generate points in multiple ways. They can attack in transition, where Clark's ability to push the pace and deliver long outlet passes turns defensive rebounds into fast break opportunities. They can operate in half-court sets, where Paige can run pick-and-roll actions or attack off the ball while Clark orchestrates the offense. They can spread the floor with perimeter shooting, forcing defenses to extend beyond their comfort zone. And when the defense finally breaks down, both players have the skill to finish plays themselves. When you combine Clark's elite playmaking with Paige's natural scoring ability, the result could be a backcourt duo capable of overwhelming defenses. Opponents would constantly face difficult decisions. Do they trap Clark and risk leaving shooters open? Do they focus on Bueckers and allow Clark more freedom to create? Do they collapse into the paint or stretch out to guard the perimeter? Every defensive adjustment opens another opportunity. That is exactly why so many fans around the basketball world are fascinated by the possibility of seeing these two players share the floor consistently. Their skill sets do not compete with each other. Instead, they enhance each other in ways that could make the entire offense more dangerous. And that is what makes this conversation so exciting here on Basketball Fan. It is not just about comparing two great players. It is about imagining how their talents might combine to elevate the entire game. If Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers continue developing the way many people expect, the day they regularly share the same backcourt could mark the beginning of one of the most dynamic offensive pairings in international basketball. So now the question goes to all of you watching Basketball Fan. What do you think about the potential of this backcourt duo? Could Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers become one of the most dangerous offensive combinations in women's basketball? Let me know your thoughts, and if you enjoyed this breakdown here on Basketball Fan, don't forget to like and subscribe for more basketball analysis, player stories, and deep dives into the game we all love. Basketball.